The night is quiet now, and the world outside your window has grown softer around the edges. Streetlights glow like tired stars, and somewhere far away, the past is still breathing in the dark. Tonight, I want to take you there, not with noise and battle cries, but with a whisper. To a time when a single city trembled with hunger, candles flickered in golden halls, and an idea small at first, like a spark in dry wood, began to glow so brightly that it changed the world forever. This is the story of the French Revolution, told slowly, gently, like a memory settling into place. As you settle in, let your body grow heavier against the bed, let your shoulders drop, and let your mind walk with me into another century. You don't need to remember every name, every date, every detail. Just feel the shape of the story. Let it unfold like a film in your imagination, moving at the pace of your breath. And if your eyes grow heavy while we wander through palaces and crowded streets, that's all right. This story will keep going without you, carrying you as far as you wish before sleep comes to meet you. We begin in a kingdom where everything looks calm from far away. France in the late 1700s seems grand and beautiful, dressed in silk and marble. To the outside world, it is a place of art, of fashion, of music echoing in glittering halls. But if you step closer, if you leave the polished floors of Versailles and walk down into the villages and city streets, you start to feel the cracks beneath the surface. In Paris, the air is thick with smoke from small fires and the whispers of ordinary people. Bread, the simplest food, has become heavy with meaning. Prices climb. Bellies remain empty. The streets are full of people who work hard and gain little. Watching carriages roll past, full of people who work little and gain everything. At the center of this world stands a king, Louis XVI, not a monster, not a villain from a cruel story, but a human being, shy and uncertain under the weight of a crown. He lives in the grand palace of Versailles, a place where mirrors stretch endlessly across gilded walls and gardens bloom in carefully planned perfection. Life there moves to the rhythm of rituals and rules. Every morning, a crowd watches him wake, dress, speak, and eat, as if just seeing their king is a kind of comfort. But behind those rituals, money is vanishing. Wars have cost too much. Debts are rising. The kingdom is like a grand ship drifting toward rocks, and the captain is not sure how to turn the wheel. Beside the king stands Marie Antoinette, his queen. She is young, elegant, and often misunderstood. Portraits show her in beautiful gowns, framed by soft colors and flowers. She laughs, she spends, she tries to create a little world of light and music around herself. She does not always see the shadows growing outside her circle of chandeliers. People whisper about her, giving her a face that is sometimes harsher than the woman herself. To those who are cold and hungry, the sight of her diamonds and towering hair feels like an insult, even if she never meant it that way. Far away from the palace, in cramped houses and worn-out shoes, live most of the people of France. Farmers who bend over fields from dawn to dusk. Artisans who shape wood and iron with practiced hands. Shopkeepers waiting for customers who can no longer afford to buy. Servants and laborers with backs that ache and futures that feel small. They pay taxes. They obey laws. They bow their heads. And more they ask, in quiet, aching voices, why must we carry so much while others carry so little? In salons and smoky rooms, another group gathers. Thinkers, writers, dreamers. Men with ink-stained fingers and restless minds, and women who open their homes to sharp conversation. They read and argue about new ideas, freedom, equality, rights that belong to every person, not only to those born into noble names. They speak of reason, of justice, of a world where power is not a birthright, but a responsibility. These ideas travel from hand to hand, page to page, like lit candles passed in the dark, turning private thoughts into public questions. France feels like a tightly wound string, stretched too far for too long. The money is running out. Harvests have been poor. Bread is scarce. People wait in lines, clutching coins that no longer buy enough. Behind them, rumors move faster than carts. That the king is weak. That the queen does not care. That something big is coming. No one can say exactly when or how, but everyone can feel it. The old world is wobbling. In 1789, King Louis, pressured by the weight of crisis, calls together a gathering that has not met in a very long time. It is called the Estates General, and it is meant to bring together the three great groups of the kingdom. The first estate, the clergy dressed in robes, speaking of God and tradition. The second estate, the nobility with their titles, their lands, their pride. And the third estate, everyone else. From lawyers and merchants to farmers and workers, they stand as the crowded heart of the country itself. From the start, there is a problem. Each estate is given one vote, not each person. Two privileged groups, one unprivileged. The clergy and nobles, with their shared interests, can overpower the third estate, even though the third represents nearly the entire population. It is as if a small circle of people stand above a sea of faces and yet speak as loudly as the sea itself. The men of the third estate feel the unfairness settle in their chests like a stone. They had come to help fix a broken kingdom, only to realize the rules are built against them. Frustrated and determined, they make a choice that will echo across history. They break away, declaring themselves the National Assembly, saying in simple, steady words, "We are the voice of the nation." Not just one estate, not one small group, but the people themselves. One day, when they find the grand hall locked, they move to a nearby indoor tennis court, an open space with high ceilings and echoes of bouncing balls. There, in that unlikely place, they raise their hands and swear an oath. They will not separate, they will not give up until France has a new constitution, a new way of being governed. It is called the tennis court oath, but beneath the simple name lies something deeper, a promise that the old order will not return untouched. While these words stir the halls of power, the streets are growing hotter with each passing day. In Paris, fear and hunger walk side by side. Rumors say that soldiers are gathering to crush the new assembly. People feel trapped between hope and danger, and that is when they begin to move. On the 14th of July, a crowd surges toward a fortress prison called the Bastille. To those who stand outside its walls, it is not just a building of stone. It is a symbol of old power, of kings who could lock people away without trial, of fear and silence. The crowd wants gunpowder, weapons, and something more, a sign that the old chains can be broken. The Bastille falls after a clash of shots and confusion. When the smoke clears, the prison is taken. Prisoners walk free. The governor is killed. And the news travels like a gust of wind across dry fields. The fall of the Bastille is not just a battle won. It is a message. The people, for the first time, have pulled down a symbol of royal power with their own hands. The date will become a national holiday, but for now, it is a moment of dizzy hope and quiet fear. For the king and queen at Versailles, it is a storm bell ringing. In the months that follow, France turns like a wheel in motion. The National Assembly begins to unmake the old world. Feudal dues, those old payments and obligations that kept peasants tied to their lords, are swept away. Nobles and clergy lose special privileges that once seemed as permanent as stone. At last, a new document is written, its words measured and powerful. The Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. It speaks of liberty, of equality before the law, of the nation as the source of power. It says that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. On paper, the future looks bright and clean, like a page ready for a better story. But the real world, as always, is messier than ink. Outside of the assembly, the people's hunger has not vanished. In October, as rain falls and the air grows colder, a crowd of women in Paris, tired, angry, desperate for bread, begin to march. Their steps beat a steady rhythm on the road to Versailles. Some carry weapons. Others carry only their determination and their empty hands. Their anger is not cruel for cruelty's sake. It is the sharp edge of a love that has been ignored, love for their children, their families, their right to eat. They reach the palace. Walls that once felt distant and safe are now surrounded by the voices of the people. Through a long, tense night, fear and fury press against marble and gold. By morning, the message is clear. The king and queen will not stay here, high above the city. They are brought back to Paris to live closer to the restless heart of the nation, carried in a slow, uneasy procession. The royal carriage rolls forward, followed by a tide of citizens. The distance between ruler and ruled has shrunk in a single journey. From that moment, France is no longer the same. The king is still called king, but he no longer stands alone above his country. His power has been trimmed, reshaped, questioned. The National Assembly continues its work, cutting away at old structures, building new ones. Yet for every hope that rises, a fear rises too. Nobles flee the country, becoming exiles in foreign lands. Other monarchs in Europe watch the changes, unsettled, wondering if this bright flame of revolution will leap across borders. Inside France, groups form, each with its own dreams and demands. There are those who want slow, careful change, keeping a limited king. There are those who want more, who feel that the work is not finished, that the roots of inequality run deep. In clubs and cafes, voices grow louder. Names like Jacobin become important. Men who sit in dark coats beneath simple ceilings and argue about the future with a kind of fierce devotion. The king, feeling cornered, makes a painful choice. He tries to escape. Dressed in disguise, with his family by his side, he rides into the night, hoping to reach a place where he can find protection and perhaps regain control. But the road does not carry him to safety. He is recognized in a town called Versailles. Brought back to Paris under watchful eyes, he is no longer just a king. He is a symbol of broken trust. Many who once pitied him now question him. If the king has slipped away from the nation, can he still be its heart? The revolution moves into darker waters. In 1792, France goes to war with neighboring kingdoms, battles that strain the country's nerves and resources. Fear sharpens the people's hearts. What if traitors are hiding among them? What if nobles, priests, or even ordinary neighbors secretly hope for the old order to return? In this storm of uncertainty, decisions become harsher. The monarchy is abolished. France is declared a republic. The king is no longer Louis XVI. He is Louis Capet, a citizen on trial. His trial is solemn, heavy with history. He stands before men who once called him Your Majesty, and now judge him as one man among many. Accused of betraying his country, of plotting against the revolution, he listens as votes are cast. The result is clear enough. He is sentenced to death. On a cold January day in 1793, he is brought to the guillotine, that new and terrible symbol of equal punishment. The blade falls quickly, but its echo moves slowly across France and beyond. A king has been executed by his own people. A line that once seemed unthinkable has now been crossed. With the king's death, the revolution enters its most troubled chapter. Enemies gather at France's borders. Inside, uprisings and revolts spark like forest fires. The leaders of the revolution fear that their dream is in danger, that the newborn republic could be strangled before it learns to stand. In this fear, they decide that softness is a luxury they cannot afford. A group called the Committee of Public Safety, led by men like Maximilien Robespierre, takes control with a single promise: to protect the revolution at any cost. At first, their words seem noble, full of stern virtue. They speak of building a just and moral society, purified of corruption. But protection slowly turns into suspicion, and suspicion turns into blood. The guillotine, once meant as a tool of fair and painless justice, becomes something else, a constant presence in the square, its wooden frame rising like a dark monument. Every day, carts roll through the streets, carrying prisoners to their final moment. Some are guilty of plotting against the revolution. Others are simply caught in the tide of fear, accused by rumor or by careless words. This time is called the Reign of Terror, and the name itself feels heavy. It is a season when ideals and violence sit side by side, when speeches about virtue end with death sentences, when no one feels entirely safe, no matter how passionately they once supported change. People who helped build the revolution are themselves judged and executed when they are seen as too soft, too radical, too proud, or simply in the way. The same sharp hope that once cut through injustice now cuts through its own creators. Robespierre, a man who believed in the power of virtue, becomes the strange face of this time. He rarely smiles, speaks with intense conviction, and sees enemies everywhere. For a while, he is called incorruptible, a man too pure to be bribed or swayed. But over time, his certainty becomes frightening. If one man believes he alone knows what is good, how long before everyone else becomes a danger in his eyes? Eventually, even those who once stood by his side decide that he has gone too far. In 1794, he too is arrested and sent to the guillotine. The blade that had fallen on so many at his command now falls on him. The terror ends not with a great speech, but with a final silence. After this storm, France is exhausted. The air seems heavy with grief and confusion. So much has changed, and yet so much pain remains. The monarchy is gone. Feudal rights are ended. New laws and new ideas sit on the books like fresh ink. But the question remains: how can a country live with its ideals without sinking back into fear or falling into chaos? A new government is formed, the Directory, trying to keep balance between extremes. It brings a kind of uneasy calm, but not a deep peace. Corruption grows. People feel that the promise of the revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, is slipping through their fingers. Into this tired, fragile France steps a young general, Napoleon Bonaparte. He comes from Corsica, small in stature, sharp in mind, and already famous for his victories in battle. While politicians argue, he wins wars. While the government stumbles, he seems to know exactly where to place his feet. Slowly, carefully, he gathers power until, in 1799, he takes control in a sudden move, a coup that feels less like a shout and more like a door quietly closing. The revolution, at least in its wildest form, is over. A new chapter begins, shaped by the will of one man who will soon crown himself emperor. And yet, even as Napoleon rises and the world changes again, the heart of the French Revolution continues to beat. Its songs and symbols, its bright words and dark memories do not disappear. Across Europe and far beyond, people who have never seen Paris feel the shockwaves. Rulers grow nervous, ordinary people grow braver. If one people could rise up and demand rights, perhaps others can too. In the years and decades that follow, revolutions and reform movements echo this first great shaking of the old order. When we look back now, from the softness of this night, it can be tempting to turn the French Revolution into something simple, a tale of heroes and villains, of clear good and evil. But like all human stories, it is more complicated. It begins with hunger and hope, with a longing for justice and dignity. It grows wild and bright, then dark and dangerous. It brings profound change and deep suffering, new rights and new wounds. It shows us how powerful ideas can be when they catch fire in human hearts, and how fragile we are when fear takes hold. The world we live in today still carries its fingerprints. The belief that all citizens should have a voice. The idea that a government's power should come from the people, not from the accident of birth. The sense that laws must apply to everyone, not just to those with titles or wealth. These ideas did not start in a single moment, but the French Revolution pushed them forward with a force that could not be ignored. It made the world stop, look, and listen. As you lie here now, listening to the last echoes of this story, imagine those people again. The woman walking miles with tired feet because her children have no bread. The young man reading a pamphlet by candlelight, feeling his mind open to the thought of a freer world. The shy king, weighing decisions too large for one human heart. The thinkers, the frightened, the brave, the cruel, the kind. They did not know how their story would end. They only knew how it felt to live through days when the ground seemed to be shifting beneath them. History is never just about kings and laws and battles. It is about human beings, breathing, hoping, fearing, trying to shape a life worth living. The French Revolution, with all its beauty and its darkness, is one long, trembling attempt to say, we matter, all of us. Our hunger matters. Our dignity matters. Our voices matter. Let that thought rest with you now, like a small, steady light in your chest. The world has changed many times since those days of breadlines and barricades, but the wish for a fairer, kinder future still moves quietly through us. As your eyes grow heavier and your breath slows, you can let the noise of guillotines and crowds fade away. All that remains is the soft truth beneath it all, that every age, including ours, is built of ordinary people daring to imagine something better. The streets of Paris grow still again in your mind. The candles are burned low. The palace halls are empty. The crowds have gone home. The echoes of their footsteps fade into the night. And here you are, safe in this moment, listening to the past like a lullaby from another world. Let the story drift away now. Let the revolution sleep. Let the world be quiet. And when you are ready, let yourself fall gently into your own kind of peace. By the time the first light of change began to touch France, the cracks in the old world were already there, running quiet and deep beneath the surface. For years, most people had lived in a kind of quiet struggle, like walking every day with a stone in their shoe and being told to be grateful for the walk. The Kingdom of France was grand on the outside, dressed in palaces and fine clothing. But beneath the silk and powdered wigs was a system built on heavy, uneven weights. Some shoulders carried everything. Others carried almost nothing at all. In this old order, called the Ancien Régime, French society was divided into 3 estates, 3 layers stacked one on top of the other. At the top stood the first estate, the clergy, the church. Priests and bishops, some close to the king, some closer to the poor, sat in positions of respect and power. Below them was the second estate, the nobility, those with titles, fine lands, and names that opened doors like silent keys. They rode horses and lived in large houses with many rooms. Many of them paid little or no tax. Below them, wide as the earth itself, was the third estate, almost everyone else. Farmers, shopkeepers, lawyers, teachers, servants, and the poor in the cities, all gathered under one simple, heavy name. The third estate worked the land, baked the bread, fought in the wars, and paid most of the taxes that fed the kingdom. They carried the weight that held up everyone else. On paper, these 3 estates formed one country under one king. But in daily life, they often felt like different worlds, sharing the same soil and the same sky, but almost nothing else. It was like a house where some rooms were overflowing with golden plates and music, and others had bare wooden tables and empty bowls. Money was a constant wound. France was in deep debt, the kind that hangs over a nation like a gray, swollen cloud. Years of war, especially help given to the American colonies in their fight for independence, had cost more than the kingdom could bear. Helping another people win their freedom had been both noble and ironic, because back home, in the fields and narrow streets of France, so many lived far from free. To try and mend this growing hole in the royal purse, the government raised taxes again and again, reaching into the pockets of those who already had the least. Bread prices climbed higher. Wages did not keep up. In the cities, especially in Paris, the people began to feel that life itself was turning into a long, thin thread that might snap at any moment. At the very top of this shaking structure stood King Louis XVI, a man more gentle and uncertain than cruel. He had not been born for thunder and iron, but for a world that expected softness to rule firm storms. Beside him was Queen Marie Antoinette, a woman from Austria with a taste for beautiful things, dresses like clouds of silk, and gardens designed like fairy tales. To the poor, she became a symbol of everything distant and uncaring, even when the truth was more complex. Rumors painted her as cold and careless, and in times of hunger, rumor feeds anger faster than truth can calm it. Yet outside the palace walls, something new was starting to move, like wind through high grass. Ideas were waking up. In dimly lit rooms, in the back of bookshops, and around worn wooden tables, people were reading the works of philosophers who dared to ask dangerous questions. Men like Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau were whispering across printed pages that power should have limits, that rulers should answer to the people, that humans were born with rights, not gifts handed down from a throne. Words like liberty, equality, and rights began to glow inside people's minds, slowly at first, like embers waiting for breath. These new ideas did not fall like lightning. They arrived like steady rain, a pamphlet left on a table, a long conversation carried into the night, a speech whispered in the corner of a salon, growing braver with each retelling. France was not only hungry in body, it was hungry in spirit. It wanted fairness. It wanted to be heard. The trouble was that the old system did not know how to listen. By the late 1780s, the kingdom's finances were in chaos. Ministers came and went, each trying to fix the problem without truly changing the way things were built. Taxes could not keep stretching over the same tired shoulders of the Third Estate. The nobility resisted reforms that would make them pay more. The king, uncertain and pushed by different voices, struggled to choose a clear path. Pressure was building, quietly, like steam trapped in a sealed pot. And then, at last, the moment came when the old world was forced to look at itself. To find a way out of the crisis, Louis XVI did something that had not been done in over 150 years. He called for the Estates General to meet. This was a gathering of representatives from all three estates, summoned to talk about the kingdom's problems and find a solution. It was as if, after decades of walking alone, the kingdom finally called all its pieces into the same room. Clergy, nobility, and the Third Estate would finally sit together, speak, and perhaps decide what came next. In villages and towns all over France, people chose their delegates, men who would carry their complaints and hopes to Versailles, where the meeting would be held. In worn ink on rough paper, they wrote down their grievances, their cahiers de doléances, long lists of what hurt and what needed to change. High taxes, unfair laws, old privileges that no longer felt just. It was like the whole country sat down at once and said, "This is what is breaking us." For the people of the Third Estate, this moment felt fragile and full of possibility. At last, perhaps, their voices would be more than echoes against stone walls. Tailors, bakers, small shopkeepers, farmers who knew the feel of the soil under their fingernails now had a line, however thin, to the center of power. They chose men who could speak with calm force, men who could read, write, and argue, lawyers, scholars, and officials who knew how to stand in a grand hall and turn frustration into careful words. One of them was a quiet, intense man named Maximilien Robespierre, a lawyer from Arras, whose name the world would come to know all too well. When the representatives began to travel toward Versailles in 1789, the road itself seemed to carry a new mood. Carriages rolled past fields where grain grew under a troubled sun. Peasants stopped and watched as men in plain black coats passed by, carrying with them not gold or silver, but promises. In the inns at night, they shared news and fears and whispered about what might happen when they all came together. Some were hopeful, some were nervous. Many felt that history itself was breathing a little faster. Versailles, when they arrived, must have felt like another planet. The palace sparkled with marble, tall mirrors, and long, straight halls that seemed to stretch forever. There, the king and queen moved among courtiers in fine clothes, under high ceilings painted with scenes of gods and victories. But into this world walked men in dark suits, their faces more lined, their hands more used to ink than to jewels. The Third Estate had entered the stage, and though no one knew it yet, the story of France was about to change forever. Still, nothing was simple. From the very start, there was a question that cut through everything. How should the Estates General vote? The old way was by estate. The First Estate would have one vote, the Second Estate another, and the Third Estate a third. 3 votes in total. This meant that the clergy and nobility, often united in interest, could easily outvote the Third Estate 2-1, no matter how many people the Third represented. After all, the Third Estate was almost the entire nation, but in this old system, it was still just one voice. The Third Estate wanted to vote by head, not by estate. That meant each representative from any order would have one vote, counted as an individual person. Since the Third Estate had many more delegates than the others, this would finally give them a real chance to shape decisions. This single argument about how to count a vote was not just about numbers. It was about what France truly was. Was it a kingdom of privileged orders, or was it a nation of people? As days turned into weeks, the air between the estates grew tense. The Third Estate waited, argued, and pushed, while the king hesitated to break with old traditions. Outside the palace, life went on with the same hard rhythm. Bread still cost more than it should, and the poor still counted coins with anxious fingers. The longer the arguments dragged on, the more people began to feel that this meeting, which had seemed so full of hope, was sinking back into the same swamp of delay and privilege. In the long evenings, some of the delegates of the Third Estate must have lain awake in their small rented rooms near Versailles and felt the weight of the moment pressing on their chests. They had been sent by people who were tired, hungry, and desperate for change. To return home with nothing would be more than a disappointment. It would be a kind of betrayal. They began to understand that if the old doors would not open, they might have to build a new doorway altogether. And slowly, quietly, a new idea began to take shape in their minds, clear and shining like a moon rising over a troubled sea. Perhaps they were not just delegates of the Third Estate anymore. Perhaps they were something larger. Perhaps they were the voice of the nation itself. As you lie here now, in the safety of your own room, you can almost feel that shift, that delicate turning point, like the moment before a tide changes. The old world was still in place. The king still sat on his throne. The nobles still walked in their fine clothes. But under the surface, in the minds of men who had packed plain coats and worn shoes, a quiet decision was being made. They were not going to simply ask for change. They were going to become it. In the next part of this story, those quiet thoughts will step into the open, like figures leaving the shadows and walking into the light. For now, just let this moment rest in your mind. A kingdom in crisis, a people finally speaking, and the first gentle, unstoppable movement of a revolution beginning to wake. The summer of 1789 arrived like a held breath. The air over France felt thick and waiting, as if the sky itself knew that something was about to break. For years, anger had been growing in quiet corners, around kitchen tables where there was not enough bread, in crowded workshops where wages never seemed to stretch far enough, and in small, dimly lit rooms where people read forbidden ideas and dreamed of a different world. But anger alone does not change history. It needs a moment, a door, a spark. And in France, that spark was about to appear. The Estates General, called by King Louis XVI to deal with the kingdom's endless debt, had begun with ceremony and hope. People watched and listened, wondering if something finally might shift. The Third Estate, carrying the weight of the country on its tired back, had come with long lists of complaints and requests, pages and pages of wishes for a fairer life. For a while there was talk. There were speeches, motions, and careful words. But beneath all of that, a simple problem remained. The voting system was rigged like a game you could never win. Each estate had one vote, no matter the number of people represented. The privileged few could always outvote the many. Old power still held the final word. Inside the halls at Versailles, where the Estates General met, the air grew tighter with each passing day. Delegates from the Third Estate began to feel the familiar weight of disappointment settling on their shoulders. It was the same story again, they thought, the same structure, dressed in new words. They were invited to speak, but not truly to decide. Yet this time, something in them refused to bend. They were tired of bowing, tired of asking for a voice in a language that never reached the throne. Slowly, quietly, they began to imagine something different, not just reform, but a completely new beginning. In June of 1789, the Third Estate took a step that could not be undone. They declared themselves the National Assembly, claiming to speak not as a small, ignored group, but as the true representatives of the French nation. It was more than a change of name. It was a change of heart. It was a way of saying, softly but firmly, "We are France too." They were not just asking for a seat at the table anymore. They were building a new one. The king did not like this. Power that had seemed distant and untouchable for centuries suddenly felt challenged by ordinary men in plain clothes. The doors to their meeting place were locked one morning without warning. Maybe it was a simple move to control them. Maybe it was a message. But to the members of the Third Estate, standing outside those closed doors under the open sky, it felt like rejection, like being shut out of the future of their own country. So they walked. Through the warm air of June, they made their way to an indoor tennis court nearby, long and echoing, with high walls that caught every sound. There, in that strange, simple place, they stood together and made a promise that still echoes through history. This promise is known as the tennis court oath. Men in worn coats and powdered hair, faces damp with heat and emotion, raised their hands, some with trembling fingers, and swore not to separate until they had given France a new constitution. It was not a loud moment, not a battle with swords or guns, but it was a deep one. It was like a key turning in a heavy lock. If you imagine it now, you can almost feel the stillness in that court, dust hanging in the air, the sound of breath, the soft scraping of shoes on the floor. And then, those words, spoken not by kings or princes, but by people who had spent their lives being told to pay, to work, to obey. Their oath was like a gentle but unbreakable thread tying them together. We will not give up. We will not go back. We will not be silenced again. Outside these halls and courts, life in Paris was growing more tense by the day. The people there were restless, hearts beating faster with rumors and fears. They heard stories of troops gathering, of the king sending soldiers to watch, to threaten, maybe even to crush this new assembly if it went too far. Bread was still hard to find. Prices were rising like a slow, relentless tide. Hunger has a way of sharpening everything: fears, hopes, anger, dreams. In the narrow streets and dark taverns of Paris, whispers turned into worries, and worries into conversations that stretched late into the night. At the same time, ideas that had once been found only in books or quiet discussions were now spreading like a soft, invisible wind. Words like liberty, equality, and rights were no longer just phrases in Latin texts. They were beginning to feel human, personal, like promises someone had made long ago and forgotten to keep. People started to see their own lives reflected in these ideas. They compared the fine carriages rolling past them to their own tired feet, the loaded tables in noble houses to their empty plates. The distance between them and us grew too large to ignore. In Versailles, the king hesitated. Louis XVI was not a villain in a storybook. He was a human being, uncertain, slow to decide, pulled between old habits and new pressures. He tried at times to seem open, to grant a little here and a little there. But each half-step, each delay, made the growing storm stronger. When he finally ordered soldiers to gather near Paris and Versailles, it felt like a dark cloud spreading across the sky. Many believed that the National Assembly would be dissolved by force, that the dream growing in that tennis court would be torn apart before it fully formed. Then came another blow to the people's fragile hope, the dismissal of Jacques Necker, the finance minister. Necker was not perfect, but he was seen as a rare figure who understood the people's pain, who spoke, at least a little, their language. When he was removed from his position in July, it felt to many like a door slamming shut. The message seemed clear. The court chose fear over fairness. In Paris, the news rolled through the streets like a wave. People gathered. They shouted, argued, worried. Something in the air tipped from unease into something more electric. If you listen closely to this moment in history, it has a strange, unsettled rhythm. On one side, a city full of people who feel they have nothing left to lose. On the other, a court wrapped in old rituals, unable to see how quickly the ground beneath it is shifting. Between them stands the National Assembly, fragile but determined, like a thin bridge stretching over a deep, fast river. Everything feels close to breaking, yet not quite broken. Not yet. As you lie there now, breathing slowly, you can imagine all these threads crossing in the summer heat. The locked doors, the raised hands, the oath on the tennis court, the soldiers marching closer, the hungry faces in Paris, the angry conversations in taverns spilling out into the streets. And somewhere above it all, the whisper of a new idea, one that says, a nation is not just its king, it is its people. Chapter by chapter, day by day, France was moving toward a point of no return. The old world did not fall in a single night. It cracked first, then trembled, then bent in ways no one could fully control. The tennis court oath was one of those bends, a quiet moment that changed the shape of everything that followed. It told the people of France and the world that power could be challenged not only with weapons, but with promises, with unity, with the simple courage of refusing to walk away. Soon, the tension in Paris would burst into action. A fortress would be stormed. The sky above the city would echo with shouts instead of whispers. But for now, in this chapter, we linger at the edge where fear and hope meet. The people have found their voice. The king has felt the pressure. The assembly has drawn its line in the sand. The story has turned a corner, softly but surely. And the world, though it does not fully know it yet, is already beginning to change. The Bastille had fallen, but the story of the revolution was only just beginning to unfold. Like a storm cloud that has finally cracked and now lets all its thunder through. News of the fortress's capture spread out from Paris like a shockwave, rolling over fields, villages, and distant towns. People who had never seen the capital, who might never see it in their lives, heard the whispers. The people of Paris had risen up. They had taken guns. They had taken a symbol of royal power. And they had not been stopped. Out in the countryside, the air in late July was heavy and warm. Wheat fields moved in slow waves when the wind passed over them, and farmers bent their backs to the earth as they always had. But now, the usual sounds of summer, the soft hum of insects, The steady rhythm of tools against soil were joined by something new, fear and rumor. Stories traveled fast and changed along the way, growing sharper, stranger, more frightening. Some said that bands of armed nobles were riding across the land, burning villages and punishing anyone who dared speak of the revolution. Others said foreign armies were already marching toward France, ready to crush the people and restore absolute power. No one knew exactly what was true. But in times of tension, uncertainty can be as dangerous as any weapon. This was the beginning of what people would later call the Great Fear. It did not start with a single event. It rose slowly, like fog, curling into the corners of people's minds. In small villages, church bells rang out at odd hours as warnings spread. They're coming. Lock your doors. Grab your tools. Hide what you can. Men who had never held more than a shovel took up scythes, old muskets, sticks, anything that could be used to defend their homes. Women gathered children close, listening to every sound outside. Sometimes no enemy appeared at all. The night would pass, empty and quiet, but sleep was thin. Nerves were tight. There was another kind of fear moving through the countryside too, not just of outside enemies, but of a possible future where nothing changed. For generations, peasants had lived under heavy burdens, rents, taxes, and feudal dues that tied them to the land and to the lords who owned it. They owed payments in money, in grain, in labor. They paid to use the lord's mill, the lord's oven, the lord's wine press. They watched carts full of their harvest roll away, even when their own cupboards were nearly bare. Now, after hearing that the people of Paris had risen, they wondered, if the world was changing in the city, did they have to stay the same in the countryside? Somewhere between fear and hope, courage began to flicker. In one village, a group of peasants might gather in the fading light of evening, their faces drawn and thoughtful. Someone would mention the Bastille. Another would talk about the National Assembly in Versailles, where the deputies of the Third Estate were promising a new kind of law, a new order built not on birth, but on rights. The more they spoke, the more an idea took root, that the old papers locked away in the manor houses, records of who owed what, proof of old feudal rights, were the chains that held them down. And chains, once seen clearly, are hard to ignore. So across parts of France, small groups of men and women began to move. Sometimes they knocked on the doors of chateaus and demanded the destruction of the records. Sometimes they forced their way in, searching for documents, for lists, for anything that tied them to the past. Old parchments that had sat untouched in dusty chests were pulled out into the open and tossed into flames. Wax seals melted, ink curled and blackened. In the warm summer night, the firelight flickered on faces that were tired, scared, and strangely relieved. In some places, the anger spread beyond the papers. Manor houses were broken into, their contents looted or destroyed. A bed that had never known a tired peasant's body might be dragged out into the yard. Drawers were emptied, silver taken, walls scorched. Not everywhere was this violence severe. Sometimes it was controlled, focused mainly on the symbols of feudal rights. But in other places it turned harsh, wild, and vengeful. The countryside, usually a place of slow, steady rhythms, suddenly pulsed with chaos. News of these uprisings reached Versailles like distant thunder rolling toward the palace. Inside those tall, gleaming walls, the world still echoed with polished shoes on marble floors, voices speaking in careful, formal tones. But even there, you could not entirely keep out the sound of a nation trembling. Deputies of the National Assembly felt the pressure building. They had spent weeks arguing, speaking, drafting, and hoping that their words would be enough. Now they realized that words alone could not hold back a storm. The people were acting on their own, reshaping the country from the bottom up. If the assembly did not respond, the chaos might spread, swallowing the fragile hope for a peaceful transition. Something had to give. On the night of August 4th, 1789, in a hall lit by candles and heavy with heat, the deputies gathered. Outside, the sky was dark, but inside, a different kind of light was about to spark. One nobleman stood and, in a surprising gesture, offered to give up his feudal privileges. Then another rose, and another. It was as if a silent dam had cracked and everyone suddenly felt the rush of water. Voices filled the room, one after another, some trembling, some steady, each offering to surrender a piece of the old system: hunting rights, seigneurial dues, special taxes, and the exemptions that had long protected the wealthy from the burdens the poor had to carry. Men who had once enjoyed the comfort of being above certain laws now spoke of equality, of sacrifice, of national unity. Perhaps some were moved by genuine conviction, others by fear, or by the desire to stay ahead of a revolution they could no longer control. But whatever their reasons, the result was the same. The foundations of the ancien regime were breaking apart. The session went on deep into the night. If you had been there, half asleep on one of the benches, the words might have started to blend together: abolished, renounced, equality, nation. But under those words lay centuries of habit and hierarchy, slowly being peeled away. For the peasants who had burned records in far-off villages, this night was an echo they could not hear yet, but one that would change their lives. By morning, a new world had been promised. The assembly declared that feudalism in its legal form was abolished. The privileges of birth were to be replaced, at least in theory, by the rights of citizens. It would take time, and nothing would be as simple as it sounded in that glowing moment. Some dues would still require compensation. Some injustices would not vanish overnight, but a line had been crossed. On paper, in law, in the minds of many, the old world was no longer untouchable. Back in the countryside, people did not wake up the next day to instant change. Fields still needed to be worked. Bread still needed to be baked. The same sun rose over the same worn paths. And yet, something was different. In whispered conversations by wells, in glances exchanged at the edges of fields, there was a growing sense that the distant assembly was, at last, beginning to speak their language. The revolution, once an idea in the minds of educated men in Paris, was now carved into the lives of villagers who had never read a single philosopher, but who understood deeply what it meant to carry too much on their backs. In Paris, the streets remained restless. Crowds still gathered, voices still rose, and tension continued to flicker between hope and fear. But the revolution was no longer just a Parisian event. It belonged to the countryside now too, to the farmers who had stood up to their lords, to families who had watched their fate flicker in the light of burning papers. France was not simply changing at the top, it was shifting in its roots. And somewhere, in the quiet moments when the noise died down, when the last candle was snuffed in a farmhouse or a city room, you might imagine someone lying awake, staring at the ceiling and thinking, if the old world can fall, what else is possible? The night of August 4th had not solved everything. It had not ended hunger or fear, but it had taken a country built on layers of privilege and struck a deep, startling crack through its center. The great fear in the countryside, the burning of feudal records, the nervous courage of deputies in Versailles, all of it was pushing France further into unknown territory. The question now was not whether change would come. It was how far it would go. The nights after the storm of 1789 did not bring calm. They brought questions. It was as if France had stepped out of one room and into another, only to find that the walls were still shifting and the ceiling not yet built. The king was still on his throne. The nobles were frightened but not gone. The country was still tangled in debt and hunger. But something deep, something invisible, had changed. The old order, the ancien regime, had been wounded. Now, slowly, carefully, a new world was trying to take shape. In Paris, the heart of that new world began to beat inside a single hall, the National Assembly. Once, these men had been just one of the three estates, the third estate, standing at the bottom of society's ladder. Now they spoke in the name of the nation itself. They were lawyers, writers, landowners, thinkers, many not rich, some not powerful, but together they carried an enormous idea that sovereignty did not belong to a king by birth, but to the people as a whole. The work before them was huge and confusing. France was filled with overlapping laws, privileges, and traditions that had piled up over centuries like old furniture in a crowded attic. There were different rules in different regions, special rights for nobles, tax exemptions for the church, and countless small injustices that ordinary people felt every day but could not change. To build something new, the assembly first had to decide what that new meant. Inside the hall, the air was often hot and thick. Men argued for hours, their voices rising and falling, hands sweeping through the air as if trying to grab hold of the future and shape it with their fingers. There were idealists who dreamed of a pure, fair republic where virtue would guide everything. There were more cautious men who wanted reform but not chaos, change but not too much. Some still believed a king was necessary, like a sun at the center of the system, though perhaps one held in place by laws instead of divine right. Outside, the people of Paris watched and waited. They had stormed the Bastille. They had shown their strength. But they were still hungry. Bread remained expensive. Work was still hard to find. Many Parisians felt that they had lit the fire of the revolution, and now they wanted to see its warmth reach them too. It was in this tense, hopeful, uncertain atmosphere that one of the most famous documents of the revolution was born, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Imagine that room, still and focused for once, as a new kind of text was shaped. Words were weighed like gold, discussed again and again, refined until they shone. The deputies looked to philosophy, to the recent American Revolution, to centuries of thought about justice and freedom. Line by line, they tried to put into writing what they believed every human being should be able to claim simply by existing. They wrote that men are born and remain free and equal in rights, that the purpose of all political association is the preservation of natural rights, liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. That law should be the same for everyone, whether it protects or punishes. That no one should be arrested or punished without due process. That freedom of opinion, even religious opinion, must be protected, so long as it does not disturb public order. That taxes should be shared fairly according to ability. That the source of all sovereignty resides not in a king, not in a noble family, but in the nation. These sentences were not just ink on paper. They were like doors opening in people's minds. Of course, the declaration was imperfect. It spoke mainly of man, and the rights of women were not recognized. Slavery, far away in the colonies, still continued. Reality lagged behind the promise of the words. But still, for those who heard or read them, the declaration felt like a new kind of sunrise. Far from Paris, in small towns and villages, these ideas arrived slowly, sometimes read aloud in a church square, sometimes explained by a literate neighbor to those who could not read. People listened and wondered, did this mean that the old dues owed to lords might truly disappear? That a poor man's word might someday matter as much before the law as that of a noble? The gap between hope and daily life was still wide, but hope itself was powerful, almost like a warm wind drifting across the land. Inside the city, clubs and newspapers began to bloom. Men gathered in former monasteries, in coffee houses, in crowded halls, to debate what the revolution should become. Among them, little by little, new names began to stand out. Robespierre, with his thin face and intense, unwavering eyes, speaking always of virtue and incorruptibility. Danton, broad and loud, with a voice that filled any room. Marat, sickly and intense, tapping out furious articles that stirred the blood of the poor. At the same time, life still unfolded in ordinary ways. Children played in the streets. Market stalls opened each morning with the same hopeful piles of vegetables and bread. Church bells rang. People married, argued, laughed, worried. The revolution lived alongside the small daily rituals of existence, like a second heartbeat that people could feel but not always see. In the royal palace, meanwhile, the world felt colder and more fragile. Louis XVI, shy, hesitant, more craftsman than ruler at heart, struggled to understand what was happening. He had accepted, under pressure, the declaration and the changes that came with it, but acceptance is not the same as enthusiasm. Around him, courtiers whispered. Some wanted him to stand firm, to push back against the revolution. Others advised patience, waiting for the storm to pass. The Queen, Mary Antoinette, watched all this with growing dread. For years, she had been a symbol of extravagance to the people, often unfairly. Now, that image weighed on her like a chain. While debates unfolded inside the assembly, outside, another kind of pressure continued to build. Bread remained scarce. Prices rose. The poor of Paris, especially the women who stood in long lines for flour and tried to feed their families with too little, felt cheated by time. They had heard of rights, of freedom, of a nation that now supposedly belonged to them. But their stomachs still ached, and their children still cried at night. Slowly, the gap between the lofty language of the revolution and the rough reality of daily survival grew sharper, like a stone in a shoe that becomes impossible to ignore. The crowd that had once surged against the Bastille was not gone. It was only waiting, listening, watching for the next sign that its anger, its need, might once again be heard. For the moment, though, the ink of the declaration was still drying. In that pause, that brief middle space between old chains being broken and new structures solidifying, France hovered. The map of power was being redrawn. Titles, privileges, and ancient rights were being swept away, at least on paper. A new kind of citizen was being imagined, one who stood a little taller, whose voice might someday carry as far as that of a king. But the world does not change quietly for long. Beyond France's borders, other kingdoms were already watching, uneasy, wondering if these dangerous ideas might spill over into their own lands. At home, nobles who had fled began to gather abroad, dreaming of a return, of revenge, of turning the clock back to the time before the storm. And in Paris itself, in cramped rooms lit by candles burning too low, people whispered of a king who might yet try to escape his own people, of armies that might march against the revolution, of hunger that could still drive them once more into the streets. The revolution had found its words. Soon, it would be tested by fire again. And as this chapter of the story closes, you can imagine the city settling into uneasy sleep, the Seine flowing quietly beneath its bridges, moonlight resting on stone and water. In the assembly hall, empty benches wait in the dark. In the palace, gods pace softly, their boots a dull echo on the floor. Somewhere, a printer sets fresh pages of the Declaration to dry. Somewhere else, a mother counts her coins and knows they are not enough. The future is there, just ahead, not yet fully seen, but coming, step by step, like dawn approaching the edge of the sky.